He shot me. The crack of that gun tore across the ranch like a thunderbolt, and for one heart-stopping second, I didn't even feel the pain. It was a cold morning, the wind carrying a faint hint of dew, and all I could register in my ears was that echoing blast. My knees went weak, my vision blurred. In that dazed haze, I remember looking down at my shirt turning dark red around my ribs, and right there, a few feet away, stood Carl Benson, president of the Willow Creek HOA, his face twisted in a mix of anger and panic as he gripped the smoking pistol. He hissed something like, "I warned you," or "You should have signed," but the words blurred together. I staggered backward, breath caught in my throat as the taste of copper rose on my tongue. My ranch, the land my family had kept for generations, felt like it was tilting under my feet. I didn't even know how this morning had spiraled into violence so fast. Carl had demanded that I sign documents, but I'd refused. Now here I was, fighting to stay upright as a searing pain blazed across my side. He glared, his knuckles white around that gun. Then he sneered a final jab. "You brought this on yourself," and turned, as though he might run. I folded, knees hitting dirt, a swirl of dust rising in the air. For a second, everything froze. He jammed some papers, the same ones he'd tried for months to get me to sign, back into his jacket, eyes darting to the side, as if he expected someone else to appear. Then, abruptly, he took off to his SUV, gravel crunching underfoot. I blinked, feeling hot blood trickle under my palm. Behind me, my oldest oak tree swayed, the branches groaning like ancient guardians. That tree had been planted some 2 centuries ago when my great-great-grandfather first claimed this land. Redstone Acre, the name still meant everything to me. No matter how many storms, droughts, or unscrupulous land developers we'd faced, we had endured. I gasped, trying to yell for help, but nothing came out. My voice vanished in the shock. Carl peeled away in his SUV. The sound of his tires on gravel faded. I wanted to scream or crawl or do something, but pain hammered me, every breath trembling with agony. Just as my eyelids threatened to close, I heard another vehicle approach, a second set of wheels rolling onto the ranch. I had no clue if it was friend or foe. Maybe it was some other crony of Carl's come to finish what he started. But I held on to a spark of hope. This land, older than the state of Texas itself, had an uncanny way of bringing help when you least expected. Then came a shout. "Mr. Carter!" The voice sounded firm, urgent. I recognized it from around town. In my disoriented state, I realized it was Deputy Kyle Morgan, a younger cop known for his honesty and sense of duty. He skidded to a stop next to me. My eyes managed to focus just long enough to see him rip off his jacket and press it over my wound. "Hang on, sir. We'll get you out of this," he muttered, voice thick with alarm. Maybe I blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I knew, ambulance lights flashed red and white over the pastures. Paramedics rushed me onto a stretcher, and just before the doors closed, as they lifted me into the ambulance, I caught one glimpse of Carl, standing far off, arms crossed, an expression of twisted satisfaction on his face. Should have signed the papers. That phrase wouldn't leave my mind. My ranch was 200 years old. Did he really think I'd just give it up? Then everything drifted into haze, sirens echoing as we raced toward the nearest hospital. It felt unreal, and yet, deep down, I knew exactly how we'd come to this point. It had started 6 months ago, on a perfectly ordinary afternoon, when the Willow Creek Homeowners Association first mailed me that thick envelope demanding my membership. But let me rewind properly. For a moment, let's drift back to those earlier days to see how a piece of paper could spiral into gunfire. I'd been out back mending a fence that had seen better decades when the mail arrived. Inside was that letter from the HOA. Willow Creek was a growing area, but my ranch sat on land older than modern boundaries. We had our own water, our own traditions, so an HOA telling me about mandatory membership and special property transfer incentives seemed laughable. I chucked it aside. Another few days went by, more letters arrived with official-sounding language. Then a short, pompous man in a crisp suit came by, introduced himself as Carl Benson, the newly elected president of Willow Creek HOA, and started going on about how I was legally obligated to join, how they could help me modernize, and how the land was far too large for one old man to manage properly. I remember shutting the door in his face. I simply had no patience for nonsense. My forefathers had settled here when Texas was still part of Mexico. We never answered to any association. That was the first step. Ignoring him seemed easiest. But Carl never took no for an answer. Soon enough I noticed small signs of sabotage. My barbed wire fences, meticulously maintained, started getting snipped in the night. The water line mysteriously broke. I'd find footprints around my barns at dawn. Then letters got nastier, fines, threats of legal action for violations, demands I remove old oaks because they were hazardous. My neighbors around Willow Creek sometimes joked that HOAs were a pain, but none had seen anything this extreme. And every time I confronted Carl, he'd force a smarmy grin. He'd say something along the lines of, "Mr. Carter, you can end this any time by signing over that ranch. Think of Florida. Think of a condo in a sunny place. Why chain yourself to this dusty acreage?" My blood would boil, because Redstone Acres wasn't just some dusty acre. My great-great-grandfather had carved it from nothing. This land carried our name, our memories, our legacy. One day, I'd discovered a sign staked out by the road. For sale. Contact Home Manurement. That pushed me over the edge. I tore the sign out of the ground, hopped in my truck, and roared up the new paved driveway Carl had built near the outskirts of town. He owned a swanky house with a big brick facade, ironically bigger than most ranch houses around. I confronted him, jabbing a finger in his face. "You ever put a sign on my land again, and I'll personally make sure you regret it." He just shrugged, gave me that fake grin, and said, "I've got powerful friends. Watch yourself." Then he shut the door. Tension rattled in my gut. Something told me he wasn't bluffing. Weeks passed. I fought off petty vandalism, fences cut so my cattle wandered off at night, nails scattered in my driveway, suspicious phone calls about code violations I'd never heard of. At one point, I even found a dead fox, placed intentionally, on my porch, as if to send a message. Meanwhile, the official letters kept coming. "Join or face legal consequences," they repeated. My neighbor Joe Simmons, an old ranch hand himself, told me to watch out. "He might be worthy. That new HOA has a nasty side," he warned. "They want all the prime land to expand." I tried to brush it off, but the day I heard gunshots near my barn and found bullet holes across the doors, I knew it was beyond intimidation. This was warfare. I called the sheriff, but by the time he arrived, no one was around. We had no proof, just shattered wood and bullet casings. The sheriff tried investigating, but half the county council had ties to the HOA somehow, and nothing stuck. I learned to sleep with one eye open. Each night I'd keep a loaded shotgun near the bed. My nights turned restless. My days filled with patching fences and double-checking livestock. And the anger simmered because this was exactly what Carl wanted. To wear me down. But I refused to yield. The ranch had survived everything from the Great Depression to dust storms. No fancy-suited newcomer would drive me out. The ugliness escalated further, culminating in that morning I described, when Carl confronted me at the crack of dawn, brandishing a pistol. He demanded I sign over the ranch property forms for some community expansion. I refused. He fired a shot that nearly tore me in half. Which brings us back to that moment in the ambulance, the sting of the bullet throbbing like fire. I arrived at the hospital with chaos swirling in my head. Nurses scrambled around, hooking me up to IVs, surgeons prepping for immediate surgery. The next few days turned into a fog of painkillers and sporadic consciousness. I vaguely recall the beep of monitors and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Then, a few evenings later, I opened my eyes to see Deputy Kyle Morgan by my bedside, flipping through some papers. He'd apparently stationed himself there, worried Carl might try something else. Kyle explained in a hushed tone that Carl was claiming self-defense, telling the county board that I'd threatened him with a rifle first. Pure fabrication. Carl also had a few council members backing his lie, insisting I was a dangerous old recluse. The legal tangle looked bad, but Kyle gave me a determined nod and said, "I don't buy his story, Mr. Carter, and I won't let him get away with this." Something about that gave me hope. The hospital lights buzzed overhead, and I let myself sink into a healing doze, trusting Kyle's honest resolve. Not long afterward, I woke late one night, alone in that hospital room, an IV drip in my arm. Shadows flickered against the wall from a street lamp outside. The corridor was eerily silent. My chest tightened with a strange sense that something was off. Then, the faint squeak of footsteps. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes, and glimpsed a figure in scrubs creeping in. They weren't carrying any standard medical kit. Insisted. They clutched a syringe in one hand, gripping it like a weapon. My heart lurched. I stayed still, feigning sleep. Adrenaline hammered through me. The figure approached my bed, reached for the IV line with practiced stealth. At the last second, I lashed out, knocking the syringe aside. It clattered to the floor. The intruder hissed a curse and lunged, attempting to clamp a hand over my mouth. Weak as I was, I fought back, thrashing my arms. We struggled. I managed to see his face in the dim glow, a man named Tom Reyes, known around town as Carl's handyman. That single recognition burned in my mind. If I survived, I would remember it. Tom snarled, "You should have signed those damn papers. None of this would have happened." He pinned my shoulders, but I jammed a knee upward, just enough to unbalance him. He stumbled, and in that brief second, the door crashed open. Deputy Kyle, gun drawn, roared, "Hands in the air!" Tom tried to spin around, but Kyle tackled him, disarming him of a small knife. Then, in swift motions, Kyle handcuffed him. The commotion brought nurses running. I lay there, panting, feeling my entire body tremble. Tom shouted some nonsense about how I'd attacked him first, but Kyle wasn't having it. He marched Tom out, and I heard them vanish down the hall. My entire being shook with the realization Carl had escalated from intimidation to attempted murder, twice now. The next morning, reporters hovered in the corridors, wanting a juicy story about a rancher who got shot by a powerful HOA president. The hospital staff tried to keep them away. People from Willow Creek had also caught wind. Some offered sympathy. Others acted uneasy about crossing Carl. Eventually, Kyle showed me a snippet of Tom's confession. He'd accepted $5,000 from Carl to silence me for good. Also, they'd discovered partial forgeries of my signature on a voluntary property transfer. It looked like Carl was forging documents to claim my land, pushing them into official channels behind my back. Kyle quietly said, "Sir, if you're up for it, I have a good attorney friend, Lisa Green. She's tough as nails. She's not local, so she can't be bought off." I told him I was ready to fight. Nothing felt more pressing than defending Redstone Acres. I spent a few more days in that hospital bed. Each minute felt agonizing, yet it steeled my resolve. At times I'd stare at the sterile ceiling and remember my father telling me stories about how our ancestors built every fence post on that ranch with sweat and grit. I'd think about the old oak, planted back in 1825, which had endured generations of storms. I'd recall the sense of freedom, the starry sky on a clear night, how the land breathed history through every blade of grass. No matter how cunning Carl or his associates were, I wouldn't abandon that legacy. And so, with bandages still tight across my torso, I checked out of the hospital, refusing to stay a day longer than necessary. Kyle drove me over to a small law office on the edge of the county. We arrived to find Lisa Green. She had short hair, sharp eyes, and an even sharper tongue. After listening to my story, she slammed a stack of documents on the table. "We're not just going to defend," she said, tapping a pen against the desk. "We're going to counterattack. Fraud, attempted murder, forgery, harassment. Every charge we can pin on them. That's the only language bullies like Carl understand." Her confidence radiated. We started collecting evidence. Kyle scrounged up official letters from the HOA, phone records, bullet casings from my barn, and the confessions of Tom Reyes. Meanwhile, Lisa guided me through statements, ensuring we had every detail. Neighbors began coming forward with their own anecdotes: suspicious break-ins, threats, shady attempts by Carl to buy their land cheap. Day by day, the case built like a fortress of facts. But we all knew Carl wouldn't sit idle. Indeed, we soon heard from various acquaintances that Carl was busy pulling strings, pressuring folks on the county council to label me incompetent, to seize my ranch under any pretext. The man was cunning. Money plus intimidation went a long way in a small county. One particularly fierce evening, we discovered a for sale sign staked along my fence line again, but this time it had my forged signature. Tacked to it was a notice, "Lot to be subdivided." That night I could hardly sleep. So many thoughts churned through my head. I kept reliving the moment he shot me, the muzzle flash, the scorching pain, the sense of helpless fury as I lay bleeding. By dawn, I resolved never to let him or any other agent of that HOA push me off. If it meant a protracted legal fight, so be it. Redstone Acres was more than farmland. It was blood and history. Around that time, we arranged a meeting at my place to gather statements. Lisa arrived early, wearing practical boots, but still projecting that aura of a big city lawyer. Kyle brought a file box stuffed with reports, witness statements, and photographs. My neighbor Joe Simmons showed up with his teenage grandson, Luke. They'd both had enough of Carl's intimidation, and they were willing to testify if needed. We hammered out a plan. Compile a lawsuit so comprehensive that Carl and the HOA board would be forced to answer for every violation. Just as we were concluding, a distant crackle of orange light flickered across the horizon. At first I thought it might be the sunrise, but it was too early and in the wrong direction. Then Joe's eyes widened and he shouted, "That's the old stable!" I sprinted outside, heart pounding. Flames rose near the western edge of my property. The stable was ablaze, smoke curling in dark plumes. Lisa grabbed her phone to call the fire department. Kyle hollered for everyone to keep back, but we couldn't just stand and watch. Luke and I raced to free the few horses stabled there. I coughed on the acrid smoke, stumbling around in the chaos. Sparks whipped across the grass, threatening to spread. Joe hauled buckets from the well, passing them along to Luke to douse what we could. Then, out of nowhere, a muffled pop sounded. Lisa yelled, "Everyone get down!" We dropped flat as a small incendiary device in the corner of the stable flared up. It wasn't large enough to blow the entire building, but it was definitely no accident. At the time firefighters arrived, part of the stable's roof had caved in, beams charred black. They extinguished the inferno, leaving behind steaming wreckage. Searching through the debris, Kyle uncovered the remnants of what looked like a crude homemade bomb, rigged to intensify the flames. This was a blatant escalation. Arson, possibly attempted homicide if we'd been inside. Lisa's face darkened. "This is attempted murder. We have to get a specialized unit out here." And so the local bomb squad was called in. The next morning, the place was teeming with investigators, forging official statements. Word spread through Willow Creek that someone had tried to burn me off my land. Most folks concluded it had to be Carl or his henchmen. The sheriff, looking weary, started to realize he couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. We even found footprints that suspiciously matched certain boots Tom Reyes wore. But Tom was locked up after the hospital incident. That meant Carl probably had other lackeys. The entire ranch reeked of smoke, heartbreak, and determination. Lisa used the incident to bolster our lawsuit. She filed an emergency injunction against the HOA, citing immediate danger. Meanwhile, more neighbors stepped up, outraged by the violence. A local mechanic recalled how Carl once threatened him for refusing to tow my truck. The feed store manager admitted that Carl had tried to bribe him for insider details about my shipments. Enough was enough. Our coalition grew bigger, regular folks uniting behind the old rancher who'd nearly been killed. Eventually, Lisa decided we should hold a town hall meeting at the Willow Creek Community Center to let everyone share their experiences. Word got out in a flash. On the night of the event, the center was crammed. Ranchers in dusty boots, store owners, retired teachers, curious young people wanting to see drama unfold. Kyle stood near the door, quietly watching for trouble. I sat in the front row, still bandaged, feeling the throbbing in my side as a reminder of how real the danger was. Lisa approached the podium, hammered through the timeline of events: intimidation, forgeries, sabotage, culminating in a shooting and an arson bomb. The room was silent except for the occasional gasp. Then she asked if anyone else wanted to speak. An elderly lady named Mrs. Diaz struggled to her feet, cane in hand, and said she remembered a time decades ago when my father donated half a calf to her family during hard times. Another older man tearfully recalled that the Carter Ranch had once employed his grandfather when no one else would. One by one, folks testified that Redstone Acres was an integral part of Willow Creek's heritage. They were furious about the disrespect and violence being unleashed in the name of an HOA. The entire room rattled with applause. You could feel an undercurrent of righteous anger building. But Carl, predictably, wasn't finished. His resources ran deep. A day later, as if to overshadow the community meeting, he orchestrated a press release claiming the crazy old rancher had staged these incidents for sympathy, that I was a menace and unfit to manage the ranch. He tried to paint me as a paranoid recluse who fired first. Some local reporters, hungry for sensational angles, regurgitated his claims, but Lisa was ready with factual evidence. Kyle provided ballistic reports, showing the bullet that struck me matched a gun registered to Carl. We had paramedic statements from the day I was shot, plus security footage from the hospital that captured Tom Reyes sneaking in. Carl's web of lies started unraveling. Yet the tension was far from over. One evening I got a frantic call from Joe Simmons. He'd spotted suspicious individuals prowling near my property line. He was convinced they intended to sabotage more structures. So Lisa told me to stay with Joe for a while, believing I'd be safer there than alone at the ranch. Joe had an old but sturdy house with a long driveway that was easy to watch from inside. We decided it would be a temporary safe haven while we prepared for the upcoming legal showdown. But that very night, around midnight, headlights appeared in the distance. Joe peered through the curtains and announced, "That's a county sheriff vehicle, but not one I recognize." I crawled to the side window, and sure enough, the two men stepping out wore uniforms that looked slightly off, cheap badges glinting. They carried large firearms. Approaching Joe's front door with ominous purpose, they banged on the door, shouting, "Open up, Carter Redstone. We have a warrant for your arrest." My stomach turned. That was obviously a lie. Joe motioned for me to slip out the back while he confronted them. He grabbed his old shotgun and threw open the door. Before they could speak, he fired a warning shot into the air. The men jumped back, cursing. "Back off!" Joe yelled. "This is private property." One raised his gun, but then the night erupted with more sirens. Real deputies, the ones Kyle had arranged for patrols, roared up the driveway. In moments, we had a standoff. The two imposters tried to flee, but Kyle's team boxed them in. Within minutes, they were disarmed and cuffed, forced to reveal that Carl had paid them to abduct or possibly kill me under the guise of a phony arrest. The magnitude of Carl's illegal tactics was now undeniable. Kyle said, "We have enough to put Carl away for years." My hands shook at the realization of how many times I'd come close to death. Yet anger mingled with relief, because every new crime they committed only strengthened our case. Lisa wasted no time. She filed a massive civil lawsuit, complete with a comprehensive criminal complaint, naming Carl Benson and the Willow Creek HOA for conspiracy, attempted murder, arson, forgery, and more. The local press devoured it. This was no longer just a local feud. It had ballooned into a county-wide scandal. State authorities got involved. A specialized investigative unit started combing through the HOA's finances. They found signs of embezzlement, suspicious property transfers, shell companies. Carl's empire was crumbling. Soon enough, the date of our hearing arrived. The courthouse overflowed with curious spectators, reporters, and supporters. Lisa took command of the courtroom with the ferocity of a seasoned litigator. On the other side, Carl had a fancy legal team, but they looked ill-prepared for the mountain of evidence we'd compiled. Testimony after testimony hammered Carl. The paramedics confirmed the trajectory of the bullet that hit me. The hospital staff recounted the infiltration by Tom Reyes, and the bomb squad explained how the device at my ranch was intentionally planted. Even some of Carl's old allies flipped, desperate to save themselves, testifying under oath about his attempts to bribe them. Carl tried every trick, blaming me, blaming incompetent rogue HOA members, spinning elaborate lies, but the jury saw through him. After days of arguments, the verdict came swiftly, guilty on multiple counts. The judge's gavel thundered, announcing that Carl would face incarceration and Redstone Acres was to be protected by a permanent injunction, shielding it from further harassment by that bogus HOA. The sense of vindication washed over me like a cool spring morning. Emotions welled in my chest as I left the courthouse, greeted by a throng of neighbors. Many patted me on the shoulder, muttering how justice had finally been served. I nodded, grateful, though a part of me still carried the weight of scars from bullets, from sabotage, from nights of terror. That very evening, a spontaneous gathering formed at my ranch. People showed up with hammers and nails to fix the stable's remains. Others brought home-cooked meals or extra livestock feed. The local fire chief sent a couple of off-duty volunteers to help. It felt like the entire community wanted to see the ranch stand stronger than ever. The old oak by the house still reached skyward. It had survived just like I had, reminding me that some roots run too deep to be torn out. I found Kyle standing near the porch, a rare smile on his usually serious face. He said, "I think your ancestors would be proud, sir." I replied softly, "I hope so." Then, just when I let myself imagine life returning to normal, a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of the main gate. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as a representative of a private development corporation. With forced politeness, he explained that his company wanted to buy Redstone Acres, offering triple the market value. I nearly laughed at the audacity, but the memory of everything I'd endured tempered my reaction. I simply told him no. He gave a faint smile, rummaged in his briefcase, and handed me another official-looking document. "In that case," he said, "we'll be filing for eminent domain. This property is of significant interest to our development plans." My heart pounded. It was the same brand of arrogance I'd seen in Carl, only packaged more professionally. Without another word, the man climbed back into his sedan and drove off, leaving a swirl of dust behind. That dust settled over the foot of my porch. I stared after him, fury and determination coiling in my chest. I'd just faced the worst betrayal imaginable, from the HOA, nearly lost my life, and now another entity threatened to take my land with a piece of paper and a legal argument. Kyle joined me on the porch. He shook his head, exhaling. "They don't give up easily, do they?" I let out a bitter chuckle. "No, they don't." But I felt something new inside me. A tempered steel, forged by everything that had happened. I'd learned to stand tall against threats, from sabotage to bullets. If these developers wanted a fight, they'd get one. We spent the next week strategizing. Lisa pored over historical records, discovering that Redstone Acres included unique heritage designations. She drafted new motions to block any eminent domain claim for private commercial gain, since such a seizure was unlawful unless it served an essential public good. Meanwhile, the local papers carried headlines about HOA president jailed and rancher survives attempted murder. Strangely, the fiasco with Carl had turned me into a symbol of sorts. An emblem of resisting land grabs. Folks who had never met me before offered moral support and pitched in on repairs. I was still physically recovering, wounds healing slowly. Some nights the throbbing in my side woke me, reminding me of the bullet that almost took my life. But every dawn I woke to see the sun rise over the rolling fields, the fences we had rebuilt standing firm, the promise of a future that was still mine to shape. That vision was worth fighting for, worth any legal battle or intimidation tactic. We continued rounding up affidavits and pictures to solidify our stand. And one evening, as I was leaning against the front porch railing, letting the breeze soothe me, I realized this war wasn't just about me or my ancestors. It was about the principle that some places, some pieces of heritage, simply aren't for sale. Early the following week, that corporate representative reappeared, accompanied by two other men in dark suits. They tried to corner me with complicated legal talk about inevitable progress. Lisa promptly stepped in, unloading a barrage of facts from historical maps and deed restrictions, citing century-old law that recognized Redstone Acres as a site of local significance. The men left, frustrated and quiet. A few nights later, however, one of my newly erected fences got plowed down by a truck that sped off in the darkness. The next morning, a wave of calls from unknown numbers lit up my phone, threats disguised as polite offers. The pattern was familiar. Different face, same intimidation. Lisa told me. We'll file for a federal lawsuit if they keep pressing. They can't just steamroll you. We waited to see if they would regroup. Meanwhile, the community around Willow Creek once again showed how strongly they believed in preserving local history. A couple of prominent families reached out, saying they'd signed statements about the cultural importance of this ranch. Even the local historical society offered support, sending a letter that recognized my land as a significant piece of the region's heritage. Despite all that positivity, a cloud of uncertainty lingered. I knew how cunning these corporate folks could be. Though Carl was gone, his brand of ruthlessness was alive and well in others. Another flash of desperation struck a few nights later. A crew of unknown men parked near my property and began surveying under the cover of darkness, setting small flags in the dirt. Kyle confronted them, demanding credentials. They waved some half-baked permit, claiming it gave them the right to measure potential development zones. He told them to clear out unless they wanted to be arrested for trespassing. They huffed and muttered, but eventually left. All this came right before Lisa scheduled a formal hearing with the county about the eminent domain issue. The day of the hearing, I went in wearing my best old suit and a bandage still visible around my side. The hearing room was tense. I recognized some of Carl's old allies on the council, though they'd distanced themselves after his arrest. The corporate representative tried to pitch the project as a resort and golf community that would bring jobs. Lisa calmly laid out the evidence. Letters from historians, records of how my ranch had existed before the county lines were properly drawn, a petition from local residents who opposed the forced seizure. Then she ended with the simplest argument. Eminent domain was never meant for private gain, especially not after attempts at intimidation. By the time she finished, the mood in the room had shifted. A hush fell across the council members. The corporate rep tried to respond, but the weight of the entire fiasco overshadowed his arguments. Eventually, the council admitted it would be near political suicide to forcibly take a storied family ranch, especially after the fiasco with Carl. They tabled the eminent domain measure, effectively blocking it. I exhaled, relief flooding me, though I knew these suits might still try something else down the line, but for now at least, Redstone Acres stood safe. That night, I sank into an old rocking chair on my porch, watching the sun descend over the horizon. Golden light bathed the land, illuminating the fresh fence posts we'd hammered in place. My wounds were healing, physical and emotional. I allowed my mind to wander back through all the trials of the last 6 months. The letters, the sabotage, the gunshot, the hospital horror, the fire, the bomb, the phony cops. It felt surreal that we'd endured so much. Yet here I was, upright, my ranch still mine to walk upon. Lisa joined me for a moment, stepping onto the porch in worn jeans and a shirt flecked with paint from helping rebuild. "How's it feel to still be master of your own land?" she asked. I closed my eyes for a second, inhaling the scent of hay and clean air. "Feels right," I answered softly, "and I'm mighty grateful for your help." She gave me a gentle nod, replying that she was proud to stand beside someone who wouldn't quit. Deputy Kyle rolled up in his cruiser a bit later, stepping out to inform me that more people had come forward with statements about Carl's under-the-table deals, ensuring an even longer prison term for him. Good news, but it made me reflect on how a single man's greed had lit a raging fire of chaos. At least some measure of justice was being done, even if it could never fully erase the scars. We parted ways that evening, with Lisa heading back to finalize more paperwork, and Kyle promising continued patrols. Once alone, I walked out to the old oak tree. The bark was thick, weathered by centuries of storms. I rested a hand against it, imagining the generations of my family who'd done the same. They might have faced bandits, or war, or famine, but the land endured. People often say the soil of Redstone Acres is stained with the sweat of every carter who came before me. Now it held a bit of my blood, too, from the day Carl fired that shot. A swirl of wind rustled the leaves overhead, and I almost felt as if the place itself was reminding me. We do not yield, not to bullies, not to greed, not to fear. As the weeks rolled on, we completed the stable repairs, replaced scorched wooden beams, restocked supplies, and restabilized the ranch's day-to-day functions. The community pitched in with a generosity I'd rarely seen. Joe Simmons donated some spare livestock to replenish what I'd lost, and several local farmers offered to share equipment. They said it was the least they could do. Luke, Joe's grandson, even took it upon himself to design some security improvements, like motion-stimulated lights and cameras around the property. That was a new era for me. I'd never placed much trust in technology, but I understood the necessity after all the sabotage. Sometimes I'd wake at dawn and ride out to the far edges of the pasture, letting the early sun warm my shoulders. The horizon stretched wide and endless, reminding me that some battles must be fought to preserve things that matter. I'd see the distant silhouette of Willow Creek's water tower, the once quiet town that had become a hotbed of legal wars and media attention. But then I'd look back at my ranch house, a testament to my ancestors' perseverance, and feel a surge of pride. Eventually, the media storm died down, replaced by other headlines. Carl Benson's final sentencing came, and he was convicted not just of attempted murder, but also of orchestrating multiple felonies involving fraud and conspiracy. The HOA board dissolved under public pressure, replaced by a smaller, more transparent group. Willow Creek, ironically, started forging a new identity, one that might just respect its old ranching roots more deeply. Some folks from out of state still showed curiosity. Is that the ranch where the big HOA scandal happened? And I'd nod, letting them see a piece of living history. But these days, I spend more time in quiet reflection than in anger. The bullet wound has become a memory, the scar a small price to pay for standing my ground. I still get letters from the developers' representatives every now and then, trying to sweeten their offer. I ignore them. My attorney, Lisa, keeps an eye out for further attempts at land seizure, but so far the threat has waned. The wind rustles through the tall grass, and I hear the cows lowing in the distance, their calls echoing the steadfast heartbeat of Redstone Acres. The land remains, as it always has, a testament to resilience. And maybe that's the real lesson in all this. People can come after you with cunning words, with guns, with bombs, with forged legal documents. But as long as you hold fast to what's rightfully yours, as long as you don't surrender your spirit, you can persevere. I've discovered there's a reservoir of courage buried in each of us, waiting to be tapped when push comes to shove. Evenings at the ranch are the best. I sit on the porch and watch the horizon blaze in gold and pink. Sometimes Kyle joins me, sipping coffee and telling me about how the town's grown less tense since Carl's downfall. Other times, Lisa stops by to check on any new legal notices or just to chat about everyday life. The memories of terror still linger, like phantoms drifting in the corners of my mind. But I've learned to breathe through them. This is my home, my past, and my future. A few days ago, a black sedan passed by slowly, as though scoping out the ranch once more. I stood firm at the fence, not budging an inch. The car eventually rolled on. Perhaps they were re-evaluating me, seeing if I had a price. But my stance won't change. I might not be the wealthiest or the youngest, but I sure as hell am rooted. So yes, the cost I paid was steep. I endured a bullet wound, hospital stays, arson attacks, a near-fatal injection attempt, yet through it all, I stood firm for Redstone Acres. Now, as the sun dips again and that oak tree shivers under the evening breeze, I let out a long breath, feeling the hush of twilight settle across the fields. The ranch is peaceful at night, the sky a canopy of stars. If there's one image that captures my life, it's that oak rising from the soil, bridging the centuries. Where many others might buckle under pressure, we remain. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes of my great-great-grandfather's axe as he cleared the land, or the murmurs of my grandmother's gentle lullabies by the fireplace. This ranch holds countless stories, and each new season adds another chapter. Whatever tomorrow brings, be it unscrupulous corporations, cunning men in suits, or some new threat demanding what isn't theirs, I'll be ready. Because the truth is, there's something stronger than fear that pulses through this ground. A legacy that binds me to every Carter who ever fought for the chance to thrive on these acres. That legacy is a vow to stand tall in the face of adversity. Even if someone tries to muzzle me again, I know I'll find the strength to keep speaking, keep protecting, keep going. My name is Carter Redstone. This is my story. And if you dare set foot here to seize what isn't yours, you'd best brace yourself for a fight you won't soon forget.